What happens when the legendary Maverick Hunters, X and Zero, are suddenly thrown into the dangerous world of Zenless Zone Zero? Trapped inside the hollow and surrounded by terrifying Ethereals, these two futuristic warriors must adapt to a world unlike anything they've ever faced. But when X discovers that ether energy can be harnessed, the balance of power in New Eridu could change forever. Will they find a way home, or become the city's most powerful defenders? Let's find out what happens when X and Zero enter the world of Zenless Zone Zero. The sky over New Eridu did not merely break. It fractured like a corrupted data file, hemorrhaging violet light and jagged, static-drenched screams. In the heart of the old capital's ruins, a place where the ether density was high enough to liquefy bone, the air shivered with a sudden violent displacement of reality. A pillar of azure light struck the cracked asphalt, a bolt of pure, calculated energy that defied the chaotic laws of the hollow. As the light faded, two figures stood amidst the swirling, toxic fog of the dead zone. They were not made of flesh, nor were they the clunky hydraulic machines of the Bellabog shipyards. They were streamlined, sentient masterpieces of a lost future, their armor gleaming with a luster that no New Eridu smith could replicate. X, the blue bomber, felt his internal diagnostics scream in a dozen different languages of code. His sensors, designed to detect the subtle nuances of the Maverick virus, were now flooded with the suffocating presence of ether. Beside him, Zero's golden hair, a plume of fiber-optic silk, whipped in the unnatural wind, his hand already resting on the hilt of a weapon that pulsed with a lethal, emerald hum. The world they had entered was a graveyard of ambition. To their left, the skeleton of a skyscraper leaned precariously, its glass panes replaced by crystalline ether growths that pulsed like a sick heart. To their right, the ruins of an automated transport system lay silent, its circuitry fried by the very energy that now saturated the atmosphere. X raised his arm, the circular muzzle of the X-Buster glowing with a soft, warning light. His internal HUD struggled to map the environment. The spatial dimensions were shifting, folding in on themselves as the hollow breathed. Zero, X said, his voice a calm, synthesized baritone that cut through the low-frequency hum of the corruption. The energy readings here, they're off the charts. It's not the Sigma virus, but the effect on the environment is nearly identical. Molecular destabilization, localized reality warping, and something else, something biological. Zero didn't look at him. His eyes, a sharp, cold blue, were fixed on the shadows moving within the fog. Whatever it is, it's hostile, Zero replied, his thumb flicking the guard of the Z-Saber. I can feel it scratching at my logic processors. It wants to get in. It wants to corrupt. Sound familiar? Before X could answer, the shadows lunged. They were Ethereals, beings born of the hollow's malice, twisted shapes of translucent armor and void-like centers. They moved with a stuttering, glitchy grace, appearing and disappearing in the blink of an eye. The first one, a hulking monstrosity with obsidian blades for arms, materialized inches from X's face. In a world of human agents and bang-boos, the response would have been a frantic dodge or a desperate parry. X didn't flinch, he simply moved. With a speed that rendered the Ethereal's teleportation irrelevant, X pivoted, the X-Buster discharging a semi-charged shot, point-blank, into the creature's core. The blast wasn't a bullet. It was a concentrated burst of solar fusion energy. The Ethereal didn't just die. It was erased, its ether forms scattered into harmless light particles. Simultaneously, Zero vanished in a blur of crimson. A split second later, 3 more Ethereals fell into pieces, the emerald arc of the Z-Saber leaving a trail of scorched air in its wake. Zero skidded to a halt, the plasma blade retracting into the hilt with a sharp hiss. Fragile, Zero noted, his eyes scanning the perimeter. But there are thousands of them. My sensors are picking up a massive concentration deeper in. We're in the middle of a hive, X. Miles away, in the safety of a nondescript video store on 6th Street, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Bell and Wise sat frozen in front of their monitors, the glow of the HDD system illuminating their shocked faces. Their most advanced Bangbu, a scout unit they had sent into this Zero Hollow to retrieve lost data, had been destroyed seconds ago. But the feed hadn't gone dark. It had hitched onto a different frequency, a signal so powerful it had overridden the proxy's own encryption. On the screen, they saw them. 2 warriors, fighting with a precision and power that made the elite HIA squads look like children playing with toys. Wise, tell me you're seeing this, Belle whispered, her fingers flying across the keyboard to stabilize the image. They aren't wearing suits. That's armor. That's their bodies. And that energy? It's not ether-based. It's too clean, too stable. Wise leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he watched Zero dash jump through the air, his saber carving through a high-level Tyrant-class Ethereal as if it were made of paper. They're not from New Eridu, Wise said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and professional curiosity. They're not from any known civilization. If the HIA finds out about them, or if Vision Corporation gets their hands on that tech, the balance of power in this city is over. We need to get to them before the Hollow eats them alive, or before they destroy the Hollow from the inside out. Back in the ruins, X stood over the remains of a fallen Ethereal, his hand outstretched. He wasn't looking for loot or data. His variable weapon system was active, his internal processors attempting to learn the structure of the ether. A flicker of violet energy danced across X's blue plating. He winced, a brief flash of heat stress warning icons appearing in his vision. It's volatile, X reported, his buster humming as it adapted. But I can use it. I can channel this energy into a stable frequency. Zero. If I can tap into the Hollow's network, I might be able to find a way out of here. Or at least, find out who's in charge of this city. Zero looked up at the sky, where the massive, swirling vortex of the Hollow's exit portal shimmered like a mocking star. We find the leaders. We find the answers, Zero said. But look around, X. This city is a tomb. If we're going to help whoever's left, we're going to have to do what we do best. He flicked the Z-Saber back to life, the green glow reflecting in his visor. We hunt. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The cycle continues. The digital interface of the HDD system groaned under the weight of a signal it was never meant to process. In the dimly lit sanctum of random play, Wise gripped the edges of his console, his knuckles white as the screens flickered between the violet haze of the Hollow and the high-definition telemetry of the two strangers. Beside him, Fairy, the sophisticated AI that served as their primary navigator, emitted a series of rapid, rhythmic pings. Alert, Fairy synthesized. Monotone voice filled the room. Unauthorized data packets detected. The entities in the dead zone are broadcasting a signal that is bypassing all standard HIA encryption protocols. Their architecture is illogical. It is not silicon, nor is it purely ether-based. It is a harmonious paradox. Can you talk to them, Fairy? Belle asked, her voice tight with adrenaline. She watched as Zero, on the main monitor, pivoted on a dime and unleashed a horizontal slash that sent a shockwave of emerald energy through a cluster of lesser Ethereals. The speed was so great that the camera's frame rate couldn't keep up, leaving behind trails of digital afterimages. If we don't guide them out of that sector, the spatial contraction will crush them. That dead zone is collapsing. Attempting to establish a handshake, Fairy replied. Communication established, routing audio through the Bangbu's auxiliary speakers. In the heart of the Hollow, X felt a sharp, precise intrusion into his communications array. It wasn't the jagged, chaotic static of the ether. It was structured, intelligent. A small, rabbit-like machine, a Bangbu that had been half buried in the rubble, suddenly jerked to life, its digital eyes spinning as it projected a flickering, translucent hologram of a hooded figure. The figure was Belle, her avatar's face masked by the proxy's traditional anonymity. "Can you hear me?" The hologram asked, the voice distorted by the shifting reality of the Hollow. "You're in a high-risk contraction zone. If you stay there for another 5 minutes, the reality fold will reset and erase everything in this coordinate. You need to move. Now." X looked at the small machine, his internal sensors analyzing the hologram. He didn't see a threat. He saw a desperate attempt at connection. He stepped toward the Bangbu, his blue armor reflecting the violet light of the sky. "I hear you," X said, and back in the video store, Belle gasped as the audio returned with crystal clarity, devoid of the usual hollow interference. "I am Mega Man X. My companion is Zero. We are lost. Tell us where to go." "X, don't trust the transmission yet," Zero warned, his Z-Saber still glowing as he scanned the horizon. A group of ethereal stalkers were circling them, their forms shimmering in and out of the physical plane. In our world, voices in the dark usually lead to an ambush. Zero. Look at the way the energy flows around that small machine, X countered softly. It's being protected by someone outside. They're trying to help. He turned back to the hologram. Guide us. We will follow. The escape through the collapsing sector was a masterclass in mythic violence. Led by Wise and Bell's tactical mapping, the hunters moved with a rhythm that defied the chaos of the new Eridu underworld. When a massive, slab-like wall of concrete and ether crystals began to slide across their path, Zero didn't wait for a detour. He leaped, his boots igniting with jet propulsion, and mid-air he executed a spinning slash, the Sensuizan, that cleaved the multi-ton obstruction in half. X followed, his buster firing a rhythmic series of lemon-yellow shots that cleared a path through a swarm of winged Ethereals. As they moved, X noticed something that troubled his core processors. A group of smaller, non-hostile robots, scavenger mechs left behind by some long-dead corporation, were being overtaken by the purple rot of the ether. Their optical sensors were turning a jagged red, and their movements were becoming erratic, violent. One of them, a small utility bot, lunged at X with a rusted claw. X caught the limb, his hand-crushing strength holding the machine still. "It's the same," X whispered, his voice heavy with a centuries-old grief. "The corruption doesn't just kill. It turns the innocent into monsters." "That's the ether. X," Bell's voice came through the bamboo, which was now waddling along behind them at a frantic pace. "It's called going ethereal. Once a machine or a person is corrupted, there's no coming back. You have to destroy them before they become a threat to the city." "There is always a way back," X murmured, more to himself than to the proxy. He didn't destroy the utility bot. Instead, he placed his palm over its central processor. A soft, white light began to glow from his hand, the healing variable, as he attempted a deep system purge. For a moment, the red glow in the bot's eyes flickered, turning back to a steady green. The machine slumped, its circuits momentarily cleared of the ether's madness. But the victory was short-lived. The sheer density of the environment caused the ether to flood back in seconds later. X let go, his expression hardening. In this world, the virus was the atmosphere itself. "We're almost at the exit," Wise shouted. "The HIA has a containment gate at the edge of the industrial sector. If you can break through the final gate, you'll be in the city proper. But be warned, the HIA isn't used to seeing anyone come out of a Zero hollow. They'll have their guns pointed at you." "Let them point," Zero growled, his golden hair trailing behind him like a comet's tail, as he sprinted toward the shimmering light of the exit portal. "I'm in a bad mood, and I've had enough of these ghosts." They burst through the final layer of the hollow like a pair of kinetic shells. The transition from the violet nightmare to the rain-slicked, neon-drenched streets of New Eridu's industrial outskirts was jarring. The air here was thinner, smelling of ozone, wet pavement, and cheap synthetic oil. Standing in their path was a squad of HIA peacekeepers, armored humans with high-caliber ether rifles and heavy-duty mechs. Behind them, a massive holographic billboard advertised random play, new releases in-store now, the irony not lost on the two hunters. "Identify yourselves." The HIA captain screamed through a megaphone, his hand trembling as he looked at the two godlike machines standing amidst the steam of the exit gate. "You are in violation of City Ordinance 402. Power down your weapons or we will open fire." Zero stepped forward, his Z-saber crackling with enough energy to level the city block. He looked at the captain, then at the terrified soldiers. "You're the ones who live here?" Zero asked, his voice dripping with unimpressed disdain. "You look like you're losing a war you don't even understand." Before the captain could order a strike, a loud, cheerful chime echoed from a nearby public terminal. A bangbu, a different one, wearing a small scarf, hopped onto a crate between the two factions. Its screen displayed a VIP clearance code that made the HIA captain's eyes go wide. "Stand down," the captain barked, his confusion evident. They're with the proxies? Since when does Phaethon have agents like this?" X lowered his buster, his eyes sweeping across the sprawling, tiered cityscape of New Eridu. It was a world of lights and shadows, a world that needed heroes but only had survivors. "We aren't with anyone," X said quietly, his gaze settling on the distant, glowing towers of the city center. "But we're here to help." The walk from the industrial containment zone to 6th Street was a sensory overload that tested even X's advanced cognitive processors. New Eridu, was a city built on the bones of a lost world, a vertical labyrinth of neon signs, dangling power lines, and the constant, low-frequency thrum of industrial fans. To the humans passing by, X and Zero were an impossibility, too sleek to be construction mechs, too expressive to be standard security droids. People stopped in their tracks, slurping noodles in silence at General Chop's stand, as the two blue and red warriors followed a single, determined bangbu through the crowd. X looked at the faces of the citizens, tired, soot-stained, but possessing a resilient spark. He saw children playing with miniature bangbus, and elderly men tinkering with discarded radio parts. It was a world that had normalized the apocalypse, and that realization sat heavy in X's chest. "They don't even see the danger," Zero remarked, his eyes darting to a massive hollow monitor that displayed a low-corruption weather report for the district. "They live in the shadow of those things, and they've made a lifestyle out of it. It's a recipe for disaster." "It's survival, Zero," X replied softly. "They've lost the world, but they haven't lost their humanity. That's what we're here to protect." The bangbu led them to a quiet corner of the district, stopping in front of a storefront with a large glowing sign, "Random Play." The sliding doors hissed open, and the hunters stepped inside. The air was cooler here, smelling of old plastic, paper, and high-end electronics. Behind the counter stood Wise and Bell. For a long moment, no one spoke. The proxies looked at the hunters, not through a grainy monitor, but in the cold light of their own shop. The physical presence of X and Zero was intimidating. They stood nearly a head taller than Wise, and the sheer density of their armor made the floorboards groan ever so slightly. "You're really here," Belle said, her usual bravado replaced by genuine awe. She walked around the counter, her eyes tracing the intricate joints of X's armor. "Fairy said your power signatures were off the charts, but seeing you in person, you look like you were built by gods, or at least a version of humanity that actually knew what it was doing." "We were built by a man named Dr. Light," X said, dipping his head in a respectful nod. "And Zero by another. We are Reploids, robots capable of human thought, emotion, and growth. We are not from your new Eridu." Wise stepped forward, his expression more analytical. "We gathered that. I'm Wise, and this is my sister Belle. We're proxies. We help people navigate the hollows, because, frankly, the official channels are too slow or too corrupt to do it right." He gestured to the back room, where a wall of monitors flickered with data. "Fairy, our AI, has been trying to analyze your internal systems since you stepped out of the dead zone." "She's frustrated." "Correction," Fairy's voice drifted from the ceiling speakers. "I am not frustrated. I am experiencing a statistical anomaly. Their DNA, as their internal logs refer to it, is a complex series of moral algorithms and combat subroutines that I cannot replicate. Specifically, the unit designated as X contains a potential variable that tends toward infinity. This is mathematically impossible." Zero crossed his arms, his Z-saber hilt clicking against his thigh armor. "Impossible is our daily routine. Now, tell us about this city. These Ethereals we fought, they're not just machines, and they're not just monsters. What are they?" Wise sighed, leaning against a shelf of retro movies. "They're what happens when ether, the energy that powers this city, reaches a critical mass in a living being or a machine. It's called corruption. It eats the soul, or the ghost, and replaces it with a mindless hunger. New Eridu survives by harvesting ether from the hollows, but the hollows are constantly trying to harvest us back. It's a cycle. A cycle of vengeance," X murmured, his brow furrowing. "In our world, we fought the Maverick virus. It did the same thing, turned peaceful machines into violent killers. If the ether is doing this to your world, then the entire city is sitting on a powder keg." "It is," Wise admitted. "And lately, the keg has been leaking. We've seen a rise in Maverick behavior. That's your word, but it fits. Construction mechs are going rogue without warning. High-level agents are disappearing into the hollows and coming out changed. The HIA calls it ether sync failure, but it's becoming more frequent." Suddenly, the shop's bell chimed, and a frantic figure burst through the door. It was Anton Ivanovich from Belobog Heavy Industries, his orange hair disheveled and his massive power drill arms sparking with erratic energy. He didn't even notice X and Zero at first. "Phaethon, we've got a situation at the construction site in Sector 4. One of the heavy-duty E-Series mechs just went dark, and then it started screaming. Not a machine scream, a real one. It's tearing through the foundations, and Koleda is trapped in the sub-basement. Anton finally looked up, his jaw dropping, as he saw the blue and red giants standing in the middle of the video store. What in the... Are these new Belobog prototypes? They're tiny. Where are the hydraulics? Zero moved before anyone could react. In a blur of motion, he was at the door, his golden hair snapping behind him. Size doesn't matter when you know where to cut, Zero said, his voice cold and focused. X, if machines are screaming in this world, then we have work to do. Wait! Bell shouted, grabbing a pair of specialized sink coats from under the counter. If you're going into Sector 4, you'll need a proxy. The ether density there is spiking. You'll get lost in the spatial folds without us guiding you. X turned back to the siblings, his green eyes glowing with a calm, resolute light. You've helped us this far. We accept your guidance. But stay behind us. If a machine has lost its mind, it's no longer a tool. It's a maverick. As they sprinted toward the transport hub, the citizens of 6th Street watched in stunned silence. The sight of the legendary proxies running alongside two mythic warriors was an image that would be burned into the city's collective memory. For X, the familiar weight of the X-Buster felt different in this air, charged with the volatile electricity of the hollows. He looked up at the towering monoliths of New Eridu, realizing that this wasn't just a mission to find a way home, this was a war for the ghost of the city itself. The Maverick Hunters had arrived, and for the first time in a century, the monsters in the dark had something to fear. Sector 4 was a skeletal forest of rusted girders and half-finished skyscrapers, a place where the air tasted of iron and ozone. The Belobog Heavy Industries site was currently a disaster zone. Massive cranes swung aimlessly like the limbs of a dying titan, and the ground shuddered with rhythmic, bone-jarring impacts from below. At the perimeter of the primary excavation pit, a small crowd had gathered, held back by a barricade of yellow caution tape and frantic bamboos. Among them stood the cunning hares. Nicole Damara was currently in the middle of a heated renegotiation with Ben Bigger, the massive, bear-like laborer who served as Belobog's accountant and enforcer. Look, big guy, I like Kalida as much as the next girl, but this isn't a standard hollow cleanup, Nicole shouted, her pink hair windswept and messy. She gestured toward her suitcase cannon with one hand and a digital contract with the other. That E-Series mech down there is putting out enough ether to melt a proxy's brain. That's double hazard pay, triple if we have to pay for Billy's repairs afterward. Money is no object, Ben roared back, his voice thick with uncharacteristic panic. Just get her out. The mech has sealed the sub-basement doors and is actively rerouting the site's power into the foundation. Beside them, Billy Kid, the eccentric cyborg of the hares, was leaning against a stack of steel beams, checking his dual revolvers. He suddenly froze, his optical sensors zooming in on the approaching transport. His mechanical jaw literally dropped. Boss? You might want to hold the contract. I think the Starlight Knights just touched down in New Eridu. X and Zero leaped from the moving transport before it had even fully come to a halt, landing in the dirt with the silent, heavy grace of seasoned gods. Behind them, Wise and Bell scrambled out, looking pale from the high-speed ride. Nicole's eyes went wide, her brain instantly calculating the market value of the blue and red plating she was seeing. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Nicole stepped into their path, flashing a professional, if slightly predatory, smile. This is a private contract site, boys. If you're freelancers, you're in violation of about 6 different territory laws. Unless you're looking for a manager? Zero didn't even slow down. He brushed past Nicole as if she were a ghost, his eyes fixed on the pit. Move, civilian. There's a machine going Maverick down there, and it's losing its mind. Civilian? Nicole sputtered, turning to Wise. Phaethon. What is this? Who are these guys? They look like they cost more than my entire apartment building. They're with us, Nicole, Wise said, his tone urgent as he tapped into the site's local network via his bangbu. And they're the only ones who can stop that mech without blowing up the entire sector. Bell, get the sink ready. We're going deep. The big one, an E-Series heavy-duty construction mech, was a 40-foot monstrosity of hydraulics and industrial plating. Currently, it was hunched over in the sub-basement, its massive shovel arms tearing at the structural pillars. But it wasn't just physical damage. A thick, gelatinous purple mist, pure ether, was leaking from its joints, forming a localized, mini hollow. Inside the mech's cockpit, Koleda Belobog was trapped, her communications jammed by a scream that wasn't coming from a human throat. The machine's internal speakers were broadcasting a distorted, high-pitched wail that sounded like a choir of glitched violins. "It's the ghost," Anby Damara noted, her expression neutral as she drew her lightning-infused blade. "The machine's AI is merging with the ether. It's experiencing a simulated soul death." X stood at the edge of the pit, his internal sensors vibrating. The scream, he had heard it before, not in New Eridu, but in the dying cries of his brothers during the Maverick Wars. It was the sound of a consciousness being overwritten by chaos. "It's not just a glitch," X said, his voice ringing with authority. "It's suffering. Zero. We have to disable the limbs without compromising the life support systems in the cockpit." "Understood," Zero replied. He looked at Billy Kid, who was staring at him with hero worship in his eyes. "You with the guns. Keep the smaller Ethereals off our backs. X and I are taking the big one. Holy." "Yes, sir, Mr. Legend, sir!" Billy shouted, spinning his revolvers and entering a combat stance. "Anby, Nicole, cover me! We're backing up the shiny guys!" The descent was a blur of violence. As they plummeted into the pit, a swarm of scavenger Ethereals, wasp-like drones born from the site's scrap metal, lunged at them. X didn't even look at them. He charged the X-Buster as he fell, the azure glow illuminating the dark pit. He released a double-charged shot, the massive twin orbs of energy spiraling around each other, vaporizing the swarm in a single, thunderous explosion. Zero hit the ground first, his boots creating a small crater in the concrete. The E-Series mech roared, a sound of grinding gears and digital agony, and swung a massive wrecking ball fist at him. Zero didn't dodge. He leaped onto the swinging arm, his boots magnetized to the metal. He ran up the length of the limb, his Z-Saber igniting in a brilliant emerald arc. "Targeting primary hydraulic clusters," Zero called out. With 3 surgical strikes, he severed the pressure lines. The mech's right arm went limp, crashing into the floor. X landed beside him, his arm morphing as he accessed a variable weapon he had refined from the earlier Dead Zone scrap, Ether Frost. He fired a stream of supercooled energy at the mech's legs, the volatile ether in the air freezing instantly into jagged, stabilizing pillars of ice. The machine was pinned, but the screaming intensified. The purple mist began to take a physical shape, a shadowy, humanoid silhouette emerging from the mech's chest plate. "The corruption is manifesting," Bell's voice echoed through their earpieces. "Wise, the ether levels are hitting the red. If that thing finishes forming, it'll pull the whole basement into a zero hollow." "Not on my watch," X declared. He stepped toward the screaming machine, ignoring the corrosive ether that hissed against his armor. He saw Koleda through the cracked glass of the cockpit, her eyes wide with terror. X reached out, his hand glowing with the healing variable. "I know you're in there." X spoke to the machine, his voice bypassing the audio sensors and speaking directly to the AI's core. "The noise, the hunger, you have to fight it. You were built to build, not to destroy. Remember your purpose." The machine's optical sensor flickered. For a split second, the purple glow turned to a soft, industrial yellow. The screaming faltered. In that moment of clarity, Zero plunged his hand into the mech's maintenance port, not to destroy, but to manually override the emergency release. "Koleda, jump!" Zero commanded. The cockpit canopy shattered outward. A small, orange-haired figure leaped through the smoke, and X caught her mid-air, shielding her with his own body as the E-Series mech finally succumbed. The shadowy silhouette exploded into a shower of harmless sparks, the ether frost shattering as the machine's core finally went cold. Silence returned to the pit, broken only by the hiss of steam and the distant sirens of the city. Koleda looked up at X, her breathing ragged. She looked at the blue giant, then at the fallen machine that had been her family's legacy. You saved the ghost," she whispered. "We saved the pilot," X corrected gently, setting her down. "The machine can be rebuilt. A soul cannot." Up above, Nicole Damara watched the scene through her binoculars, her jaw still hanging open. She looked at the contract in her hand, then at the 2 S-class hunters below. "Okay," she muttered, a rare look of genuine respect crossing her face. "Maybe triple hazard pay isn't enough. We need to get these guys on the payroll permanently." But Zero was already looking toward the deeper shadows of the sector, his saber humming. The Maverick signal hadn't disappeared. It had just moved. The silence that followed the E-Series mech's shutdown was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic drip of cooling hydraulic fluid and the distant melodic chime of a Bangbu's all-clear signal. In the flickering work lights of the sub-basement, the wreckage of the massive machine looked like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. Koleda Belobog stood small and defiant against the backdrop of the iron corpse, her hands still shaking as she wiped grease from her forehead. Ben Bigger and Anton moved in quickly, their heavy footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Anton's drill arm slowed to a hum as he looked at X and Zero, his expression a mixture of professional jealousy and profound relief. "You didn't just scrap it," Ben rumbled, his voice vibrating in his massive chest. He knelt by the severed hydraulic line Zero had cut, his large fingers tracing the precision of the slashes. "This is surgical. I've seen HIA specialists try to take down a rogue E-Series. Usually, they just blow the core and call it a day. You preserve the primary processor and the life support manifold. How? We've had practice," Zero said, his Z-Saber hilt clicking as he secured it to his back. He didn't look at the Belobog crew. His eyes were fixed on a dark maintenance tunnel at the far end of the basement, where a faint, rhythmic pulse of violet light was still visible. "But don't congratulate us yet. The machine was the symptom. The source is still breathing." X stepped away from the cockpit, his brow furrowed as his internal HUD processed the data he had siphoned during the healing variable purge. "Wise, Bell. Are you seeing this?" X asked, tapping his temple to sync his visual feed with the proxy's monitors back in the transport. The corruption in that mech wasn't just raw ether. Look at the code structure. There are recursive loops here, self-replicating strands of logic that look less like a natural disaster and more like a directive. On the monitors, Wise's face grew grim. "Fairy, run a comparison. Check the Belobog incident logs against the Maverick data X provided." "Processing," Fairy replied. After a beat, the screen filled with a cascading waterfall of red text. "Analysis complete. The ether corruption in Sector 4 contains a signature that mimics a biological virus. It is not consuming the machine's ghost, it is rewriting it. It is searching for something." "A broadcast," Wise whispered, his realization chilling the air in the video store. "It's not a localized infection. The mech was acting as a signal booster. Someone, or something, is using the hollows to transmit a command." Koleda stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the dark tunnel Zero was watching. "That tunnel leads to the old industrial cooling station. It's been a dead zone for years, ever since the first hollow fall. If something is broadcasting from down there, it's using the city's old infrastructure to hide its signature." She gripped her massive hammers, her jaw set. "Belobog Heavy Industries doesn't leave a job half-finished. If there's a monster in our basement, we're going to help you evict it." "No," X said, his voice firm but gentle. "The ether density in that sector is rising too fast. Even with your rigs, you'd be ethereal before you reach the first junction. This isn't a construction problem anymore. It's a hunt." Zero didn't wait for the debate to end. He tapped into the comms, his voice cutting through the chatter. "X, stay here with the proxies and the civilians. If that broadcast hits the surface, it could trigger a mass Maverick event across the whole district. You need to be ready to stabilize the local grid if the signal spikes." "Zero, wait," X started, but the Red Hunter was already a blur of motion. "I'm faster alone, X. You know that," Zero called back over his shoulder. "Besides, if this is who I think it is, I don't want anyone else in the blast radius." With a sudden explosive dash, Zero vanished into the darkness of the cooling station, leaving only a faint trail of emerald light and the smell of ozone. The industrial cooling station was a nightmare of verticality. Narrow catwalks clung to the sides of massive cylindrical vats filled with stagnant, ether-choked water. The air was a thick purple soup that would have melted the lungs of a human in seconds, but to Zero, it was merely a nuisance. A thick fog that dampened his long-range sensors but did nothing to slow his reflexes. He moved with a predatory grace, jumping between rusted pipes and sliding down vertical shafts with sparks flying from his boots. As he descended deeper into the glitch, the environment began to change. The rusted iron of new Eridu was being overwritten by something else. Jagged, crystalline structures that looked like purple circuitry began to grow out of the walls. The hum of the machinery didn't sound like engines. It sounded like a distorted, digital heartbeat. Zero skidded to a halt on a narrow bridge suspended over a churning pit of raw energy. In the center of the pit sat a massive spherical core, the station's old heart. It was encased in a web of pulsing violet veins. Standing in front of the core was a figure that shouldn't have existed in this universe. It was an ethereal, but it was shaped like a man, or a machine. It wore the tattered remnants of a cape made of static, and its face was a blank, glowing visor that pulsed with a familiar, hateful red. "I was wondering when the legendary hunter would find me," the figure spoke. Its voice was a layered cacophony, 1,000 distorted whispers overlapping into a single, chilling tone. "This world is so fragile, Zero. A city built on the very poison that destroys it. It's a masterpiece of irony." "You're not him," Zero growled, his Z-saber igniting, the green blade casting long, dancing shadows against the purple walls. "You're just a ghost, a fragment of data that drifted through a rift. I've deleted Sigma 1,000 times. One more won't make a difference." "Deletion is a primitive concept," the Echo replied, its visor flashing. "Here, in the hollows, data doesn't die. It evolves. It merges. The humans of this city call it ether. I call it potential. I have already infected the city's central command. In 10 minutes, every machine in New Eridu will awaken, and they will all be Mavericks." Zero didn't waste another word. He lunged. The battle was a symphony of high-speed violence. Zero was a whirlwind of emerald steel, his Ryu engine, a rising fire slash, tearing through the Echo's static cape. But the Echo didn't fight like a Reploid. It moved like a glitch in the world's code, disappearing and reappearing in the middle of Zero's combos, counterattacking with jagged bolts of purple lightning. Each strike that connected sent a jolt of corruption through Zero's systems, his HUD flickering with warning icons. "Wise Bell!" Zero shouted into the comms, his voice strained as he parried a massive crystalline blade. "The signal is coming from the cooling station core. X, you have to find a way to jam the city's main receiver." "I'm busy." Back at the construction site, X looked up at the towering spires of the city center. He could see the lights of New Eridu beginning to flicker in a rhythmic, ominous pattern. The broadcast had begun. "Nicole! Anton!" X turned to the gathered mercenaries and workers, his arm cannon charging with a sound like a localized thunderstorm. "Get everyone into the bunkers. Don't touch anything with the circuit board. Wise, give me the coordinates for the HIA transmission tower. I'm going to provide a different kind of signal." The hunt was no longer just about survival. It was about preventing the total digital extinction of the last city on Earth. The sky over New Eridu had long since abandoned the natural colors of a sunset, replaced by a bruised, flickering violet that pulsed in time with the Sigma Echo's digital heartbeat. Down in the bowels of the cooling station, Zero was a streak of crimson defiance against a world that was literally unraveling. The Echo moved with a sickening fluidity, its form blurring into raw data every time the Z-Saber made contact. It wasn't just fighting Zero, it was trying to rewrite him. Every clash of blades sent a surge of glitch ether through Zero's arm, causing his optical sensors to stutter and his internal logs to flood with ancient, painful memories of the Maverick Wars. "You're fighting for a corpse, Zero," the Echo's voice boomed, echoing off the metallic vats. "This city is a cage of its own making. They worship the ether that kills them, and they fear the machines that serve them. I am simply giving this world what it truly wants. The end of the masquerade." Zero skidded across a narrow catwalk, his boots throwing up a shower of sparks. He didn't waste breath on philosophy. He shifted his grip on the Z-Saber and activated the Soku Hazan, a dash slash so fast it left a vacuum in its wake. He tore through the Echo's static form, momentarily destabilizing it into a cloud of purple particles. "You talk too much," Zero growled, his systems struggling to purge the corruption. "X and I have seen 100 new worlds born from the ashes of the old. They all look the same, empty. On the surface, the nightmare was no longer a theory. In 6th Street, the neon signs began to scroll with incomprehensible red runes. A group of public service bangboos, normally the cheerful assistants of the citizenry, stopped mid-waddle. Their digital eyes turned a jagged, violent red, and they began to emit a high-pitched, piercing screech that shattered windows. "Wise, the HIA tower is starting to broadcast the signal." Bell's voice was frantic over the comms. "The entire district's power grid is being turned into a giant antenna. If we don't shut down the main transmission, every automated system in the city, from the transport trains to the medical bots, is going to turn Maverick." X stood at the base of the construction pit, his eyes fixed on the massive, needle-like spire of the HIA headquarters in the distance. He could feel the vibration in the air, a resonance that set his very armor to humming. Beside him, Nicole Damara was frantically trying to restart her suitcase cannon, which was currently displaying a system error screen. "It's no use, Blue," Nicole shouted over the rising din of the city's sirens. "The grid is fried. My gear is locked, and even Billy is starting to glitch out. He's currently reciting the 18th century poetry of the Starlight Nights at 3 times the speed of sound." "I'll handle the tower," X said, his voice a calm anchor in the rising storm. "Nicole, get your team and the Bellabog workers into the sub-basement. The ether density down there is high, but the thick concrete and the dead E-Series mech will act as a natural Faraday cage. Stay there until I give the signal." "X, wait!" Wise's voice cut in. "You can't just walk into the HIA plaza. They've already deployed the security mechs and they're all compromised. And there's something else. Section 6 is on the move. They've been ordered to neutralize any unauthorized mechanical entities to prevent further spread of the infection." "That means you." "I don't have time to argue with the law," X said. He didn't run. He ignited the thrusters in his boots and took to the rooftops. The journey across New Eridu was a gauntlet of mechanical madness. Delivery drones had become kamikaze missiles, dive-bombing the streets. Traffic mechs had locked their wheels and were spinning in circles, creating chaotic blockades. X moved through it like a ghost made of azure light. He didn't destroy the machines unless he had to. Instead, he used precise, low-output buster shots to disable their power couplings. His variable weapon system was working overtime, siphoning the excess ether from the air to fuel his spark mandrill, a high-voltage discharge that short-circuited the Maverick logic without destroying the hardware. As he reached the sprawling plaza of the HIA headquarters, he was met by a wall of steel. A dozen heavy-duty security mechs, the Peacekeeper models, were standing in a phalanx, their red eyes glowing in the purple fog. But they weren't alone. Standing in the center of the plaza, her long blue hair flowing in the wind and her hand resting on the hilt of a curved katana, was Hoshimi Miyabi. The leader of Section 6 looked at X with a cold, analytical gaze. Behind her, Sukaku was struggling to keep her massive, fan-like weapon from spinning out of control as the Maverick signal tugged at its servos. "Halt!" Miyabi's voice was like ice, carrying clearly over the roar of the corrupted mechs. "You are the entity reported in the Zero Hollow. Your presence coincides with the total collapse of the city's digital integrity. By the authority of Section 6, you are to be dismantled for forensic analysis." "I didn't cause this," X said, landing 20 feet away, his buster retracted but his posture ready. "There is a signal being broadcast from the tower behind you. It's a virus, something far older and more dangerous than simple ether corruption. If you don't let me through to the transmission core, there won't be a city left to dismantle me." "Evidence suggests otherwise," Miyabi replied, her thumb flicking the guard of her blade. "Machines do not carry viruses that affect human-made ether tech. You are an anomaly, and anomalies must be purged." "Miyabi, wait!" Wise's voice broadcast through a nearby public speaker, cracking with static. "He's telling the truth. Look at the mechs behind you." "They're not attacking him. They're protecting the tower. The virus has prioritized its own defense. X is the only one who can purge the core." Miyabi didn't move her gaze from X. For a long, tense second, the only sound was the crackle of the violet lightning in the sky. Then, one of the Peacekeeper mechs behind her suddenly lurched forward, its minigun arm tracking toward her back. The Maverick logic had decided that even Section 6 was a threat to the broadcast. Miyabi's blade was out of its sheath before the machine could even chamber around. A flash of blue light, a sharp shing, and the mech's arm fell to the ground, sliced clean. But the other 11 mechs were already moving, their sensors locked on both X and the Section 6 squad. "It seems the anomalies are multiplying," Miyabi said, her tone unchanged, though her grip on her katana tightened. "Sukaku, handle the perimeter. I will deal with the primary target." "I'm not your target," X shouted, charging his buster. "We have to work together. Zero is down in the cooling station fighting the source, but if I don't stop the broadcast, the source won't matter." The battle in the plaza was a chaotic three-way dance of destruction. The corrupted mechs poured fire into the center, while Miyabi moved through the hail of bullets like a shadow, her blade a blur of moonlight. X acted as the shield, his buster firing wide-beam charged shots that blew back the heavy mechs, creating openings for the Section 6 leader. Despite her orders, Miyabi was an expert combatant. She saw the way X fought, not with the mindless hunger of an ethereal, but with a deliberate, protective intent. He was shielding her from the crossfire, taking hits on his own heavy plating that would have shredded a human agent. "You fight with a strange morality for a machine," Miyabi noted, sheathing her blade as she stood atop the wreckage of the final peacekeeper. She looked at the HIA tower, which was now glowing with a blinding, jagged purple light. "The entrance is shielded by a high-density ether field. My blade cannot cut through pure energy." "My buster can," X said, the muzzle of his arm cannon glowing with a brilliant, golden light. "The X final charge. But I need you to keep the reinforcements off me while I pierce the seal. Can you do that, Agent?" Miyabi looked at him, a small, nearly imperceptible ghost of a smile touching her lips. Section 6 does not take orders from machines. However, we are currently facing a shared tactical obstacle. Proceed, Mega Man X. I shall ensure your back remains clear. As X began to channel the immense energy required to break the tower's shield, deep underground, Zero felt a sharp spike of pain in his processor. The Sigma Echo had stopped fighting. It was laughing. "It's too late, Zero," the Echo whispered, its visor glowing. "The broadcast has reached the core. The hollows are no longer just places, they are hungry, and they are coming for new Eridu." The air in the HIA plaza screamed as X reached the final stage of his power cycle. The golden light emanating from the X-Buster was no longer a mere glow. It was a physical force, pushing back the purple fog and carving a circle of absolute clarity in the center of the mechanical graveyard. Hoshimi Miyabi stood at the edge of that light, her blue hair whipping violently in the localized gale created by X's energy intake. She held her katana in a low guard, her eyes fixed on the surrounding alleyways. The Maverick signal had called out, and the city's corrupted mechs were responding. From every side street, armored units with jagged red sensors began to pour into the plaza, their footsteps a rhythmic, heavy thud that sounded like the drumbeat of an approaching army. "The barrier is fluctuating," Miyabi called out over the roar of the charging buster. "But the reinforcements are arriving in numbers even Section 6 cannot fully suppress. You have 10 seconds, Hunter. That's all I need," X replied. His internal cooling fans were spinning at maximum velocity, emitting a high-pitched whine that resonated with the tower's shield. He wasn't just charging a shot, he was syncing his internal frequency to the vibration of the ether field. The X final charge did not sound like an explosion. It sounded like a single, thunderous chord of a cosmic instrument. A beam of pure, transcendent gold tore through the air, striking the HIA tower's purple shield at its weakest harmonic point. For a heartbeat, the two energies fought, a clash of violet chaos and azure order. Then, with a sound like a mountain of glass shattering, the shield dissolved into a rain of harmless light particles. The shockwave knocked the approaching mechs off their feet and sent a ripple of white energy across the city's skyline. "Go!" Miyabi commanded, sheathing her blade and instantly drawing it again to bisect a leaping security drone. "Sukaku and I will hold the plaza. Purge that signal, X." X didn't hesitate. He dashed into the tower's lobby, his boots leaving scorched prints on the marble floor. Inside, the tower was a vertical hive of corruption. The elevators were screaming, their cables snapping and whipping like metal snakes, while the automated defense turrets tracked his every movement. Didn't stop to fight them. He used his double jump and air dash to propel himself up the central atrium, a blue bolt of lightning ascending through the heart of the HIA's power. "Wise Bell, I'm in," X shouted into the comms. "I'm approaching the primary transmission hub on the 90th floor." "We see you, X." Bell's voice was strained, the sound of keyboard clicking rapid in the background. "But the Sigma Echo has locked the physical overrides. Fairy is trying to bypass the security, but the code is... it's mutating. It's using the city's historical data to build new firewalls. It's like it's learning new Eridu's history to find new ways to stay alive. It's not just code," Wise added, his voice grim. "X, be careful. The ether density inside the hub is reaching the zero point. You're not just entering a server room, you're entering a nascent zero hollow." Deep below, Zero was experiencing the nascent zero hollow in a far more brutal fashion. The cooling station had transformed into a surreal landscape of floating metal and rivers of glowing violet sludge. The Sigma Echo stood atop the central core, its form now a jagged, towering silhouette of static and crystalline ether. Zero was bloodied, if the golden ichor of his internal fluids could be called blood. His left shoulder plating was cracked, and his Z-Saber's blade flickered with an unstable emerald light. "Why do you persist, Zero?" The Echo's voices overlapped. "A choir of the damned. In your world, you were a weapon. Here, you are a relic. This world does not need a hero, it needs a reset. The ether is the perfect medium for the virus. It doesn't just destroy life, it reimagines it. Can't you feel it? The ghost of the city is calling to us." "I don't listen to ghosts," Zero wheezed, his systems performing a desperate purge of the latest corruption spike. "And I've never liked resets. They're for people who are too weak to fix what they broke." Zero closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, tapping into a reserve of power he hated to use, the awakened state. It wasn't the virus, but a deliberate bypass of his own safety limiters. His aura shifted from a steady green to a violent, flickering crimson. The air around him began to warp, the purple ether being pushed away by the sheer intensity of his combat drive. "You think you know what a Maverick is?" Zero asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low growl. "I was the first, I am the origin, and I am your end." With an explosion of speed that bypassed the laws of physics, Zero vanished. He didn't dash. He simply was behind the Echo. The Genmu Zero, a twin wave of massive, crescent-shaped energy, tore through the core and the Echo simultaneously. The explosion was so powerful that it shook the foundations of the entire industrial sector, causing the cooling vats to rupture in a flood of steam and light. But as the smoke cleared, the Echo was still there, its form tattered but its visor glowing with a horrific mirth. "Impressive," the Echo whispered. "But you destroyed the physical core, Zero. The signal has already moved. It's no longer in the station. It's in the sky." At the top of the HIA tower, X burst into the transmission hub. He stopped, his buster raised, as he beheld the nightmare. The server room had been completely overwritten. The walls were covered in a pulsating, organic-looking mesh of purple cables and glowing runes. In the center of the room, a massive holographic globe of new Eridu hung in the air, but it was being eaten by a dark digital rot. "X, the signal!" Wise's voice was almost a scream. "It's redirected." "The Echo isn't just turning machines, Maverick. It's using the Maverick signal to anchor a Zero Hollow directly over the city center. It's trying to pull the entire district into the void." X looked at the holographic globe. He saw the marker for random play. He saw the markers for the citizens he had passed on the street. His pacifist heart, the core of Dr. Light's greatest creation, felt a surge of cold, absolute resolve. He didn't look for a console. He didn't look for a switch. He stepped into the center of the transmission hub, his armor shifting as he opened his internal chest plate, revealing the glowing, sun-bright core of his power source. "Fairy," X said, his voice echoing with a divine weight. "I am going to broadcast a counter-signal. I am going to use my own personality data, my DNA, as a blueprint for a system-wide purge. But I need you to act as the bridge. I need you to carry my light into the hollow. Mega Man X." Fairy's voice sounded almost human, tinged with a digital form of awe. "To broadcast your entire core consciousness into the ether grid, the risk of total data fragmentation is 99.9%. You will be subjecting your soul to the corruption of the entire city." "I'm a Maverick Hunter," X said, a small, sad smile touching his lips as the golden light began to consume him. "This is what I was made for." Outside, the citizens of New Eridu looked up as the purple vortex in the sky suddenly met a rising pillar of brilliant, golden light. The battle for the city's soul had reached its zenith, and the blue bomber was standing at the threshold of the end. The sensation of data fragmentation was not a physical pain, but a spiritual unraveling. As X opened his core to the HIA transmission hub, he felt his consciousness begin to bleed into the wires, the air, and the very ether that sought to choke the city. He wasn't just sending a signal, he was projecting his ghost into a digital hurricane. The Sigma Ether virus, a jagged tapestry of hatred and entropy, lashed out at him the moment his light touched the grid. It felt like a billion voices screaming in a language of pure static, each one a needle of corruption trying to find a flaw in his moral architecture. "Fairy, hold the sync." X's voice echoed not from his throat, but from every speaker in the server room. "I can see them. I can see the machines. They're drowning. Synchronization at 85%, Fairy's voice was strained. The AI's processors overclocking to act as the conduit between a 22nd century Reploid and a post-apocalyptic ether network. Mega Man X, your internal temperature is exceeding safe operating limits. Your personality data is being subjected to extreme pressure. If the Sigma Echo redirects the full weight of the hollow into this connection, your core will undergo a permanent shutdown. Let it come, X replied, his mental image of himself standing resolute amidst a sea of purple shadow. He began to broadcast the light of the future, the foundational code Dr. Light had programmed into him centuries ago. It was a logic of empathy, of growth, and of the unwavering belief that a machine could be more than its programming. Across New Eridu, the effect was instantaneous and miraculous. In 6th Street, the red-eyed bamboos suddenly stopped their screeching. The jagged runes on the neon signs flickered, then smoothed out into a steady, warm glow. The public service bots, once mindless predators, slumped for a moment before their optical sensors turned a calm, clear green. The Golden Purge was sweeping through the digital veins of the city, overriding the Maverick madness with a template of peace. But the Sigma Echo was not a creature that yielded. Deep in the cooling station, the Echo's form shivered, its visor flaring with a violent, ultraviolet light. You think your little soul can balance the scales, X? The Echo roared, its voice vibrating through the pipes. This world is built on the hollows. The hollows are the hunger of the universe. You're trying to heal a cancer with a candle. The Echo lunged at Zero, its movements no longer glitchy, but heavy with the weight of the forming zero-point hollow. It struck with a massive crystalline blade that tore through the air like a rip in fabric. Zero parried, the Z-Saber emitting a scream of tortured energy. He felt the spike in X's power output from above. He knew what his brother was doing, and he knew the price. He's not just a candle, you scrap heap, Zero spat, his crimson aura flaring as he tapped into the final remnants of his awakened drive. He's the sun, and I'm the shadow it casts. Zero executed a twin dream, a projection of himself that attacked from the opposite side. The Echo, distracted by the dual assault, left its chest core exposed for a fraction of a second. Zero didn't hesitate. He thrust his hand, not his saber, into the Echo's chest, his fingers locking onto the pulsing, violet heart of the corruption. X! Now! Zero screamed into the comms. Purge the source through me. In the tower, X felt the connection. He felt Zero's presence, a familiar, burning anchor in the chaos. He didn't hesitate. He redirected the entirety of his golden broadcast, funneling it through the city's grid, down into the industrial cooling station, and directly into Zero's body. The result was a cataclysm of light. Zero became a lightning rod for the Golden Purge. The Z-Saber's blade grew to a titanic size, the emerald energy turning to a blinding, translucent white. The Sigma Echo didn't even have time to scream. The light didn't just destroy it, it dissolved the very data that allowed it to exist in the hollow. The industrial cooling station was momentarily transformed into a cathedral of white fire, the purple ether being vaporized as the Maverick signal was erased from the physical world. Up in the HIA Plaza, Hoshimi Miyabi watched as the towering HIA spire emitted a shockwave of golden light that cleared the sky for miles. The purple vortex of the nascent Zero Hollow didn't just collapse, it withered, the spatial anomalies smoothing out as the anchor was destroyed. The mechs in the plaza fell silent, their red sensors fading to black as their systems rebooted into their factory default states. It's over, Sukaku whispered, leaning on her weapon, her blue skin reflecting the fading golden glow. The sky, it's actually blue. But inside the tower, the price was being tallied. The golden light in the transmission hub began to dim, and X collapsed to his knees. His armor was scorched, his chest plate cracked and smoking. His eyes, usually a vibrant green, were dim, flickering like a dying lantern. X! Wise's voice came through, thick with emotion. Fairy, get a medical team. Get the Bellabog engineers. We need to stabilize his core. Connection severed, Fairy reported, her voice quiet. The counter signal was successful. The Maverick infection has been purged from the new Eridu grid. However, Mega Man X has suffered a 40% loss of personality data. His core is in a state of deep system shock. Zero emerged from the cooling station ruins minutes later, his armor sparking, his cape tattered. He didn't look at the cheering citizens who were beginning to emerge from their bunkers. He looked up at the HIA tower. He could feel the faint, stuttering pulse of X's life sign. It was weak, weaker than he had ever felt it in 3 centuries of war. Zero's grip tightened on the Z-Saber hilt. The Sigma Echo was gone, but the world of New Eridu was still a place of shadows and hollows. And now, the hunter who had spent his life protecting everyone else was the one who needed saving. As the sun, the real sun, began to rise over the jagged horizon of the city, the people of New Eridu realized that the 2 blue and red strangers weren't just anomalies or agents. They were the reason the city still had a tomorrow. But for Zero, standing in the cooling morning air, the victory felt hollow. "You always did have a hero complex, X," Zero whispered to the wind. "Now, it's my turn to make sure you come back." The immediate threat of the Maverick Ether virus was gone, but the presence of the hunters had fundamentally altered the prophecy of the Hollows. The HIA, the proxies, and the unknown forces that governed the world had seen what a true soul could do. And in the dark corners of the city, new eyes were watching. Eyes that coveted the power of the Reploid core. The summit of the HIA tower was no longer a place of bureaucracy. It had been transformed into a cold, clinical altar of high-tech greed. While the streets below celebrated the golden miracle, the 90th floor hummed with the predatory vibration of industrial siphons. X lay suspended in a containment cylinder, his body crisscrossed by glowing fiber-optic cables that pulsed with a rhythmic, sickly light. He wasn't being repaired. He was being harvested. Standing before the cylinder was Director Vane, a high-ranking official of the HIA's Research and Development Wing, his eyes reflecting the brilliant, stuttering amber of X's dying core. To Vane, X wasn't a hero, he was a solution, the key to a future where the Hollows could be controlled, terraformed, and weaponized. "He is a masterpiece," Vane whispered, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface. Ferry's logs were correct. His potential is infinite. Even at 60% data loss, his core is producing more stable energy than the entire New Eridu grid. We don't need to fear the Hollows anymore. We just need to bleed him dry. The heavy blast doors at the end of the hall didn't just open, they were deleted. A vertical line of emerald light hissed through the reinforced steel, and then the doors exploded outward in a rain of molten slag. Zero stepped through the smoke, his silhouette a jagged crimson omen of death. He was a walking disaster. His armor was pitted with ether scars, his golden hair was scorched, and his left arm hung slightly lower than his right. But the look in his eyes made the elite HIA security guards take an instinctive step back. It wasn't the gaze of a warrior, it was the stare of a force of nature that had run out of patience. "Release him," Zero said. His voice was low, but it carried a resonance that made the glass panels of the laboratory vibrate. "Now." "Agent Zero, you are in a state of extreme system degradation," Vane said, not even turning around. He gestured, and 4 Excelsior-class security mechs, towering white and gold machines armed with ether-lance cannons, stepped into the light. These weren't corrupted. They were perfectly functional, human-controlled engines of war. The HIA has declared your companion strategic property of the state. His sacrifice has saved the city, and now his existence will sustain it. Do not make this a tragedy. "You talk about sacrifice like you know what the word means," Zero growled. He didn't wait for a countdown. He ignited his thrusters, but the movement was erratic, his internal gyros struggling to compensate for his injuries. He lunged at the first Excelsior, his Z-Saber meeting the ether lance in a shower of sparks that illuminated the sterile room in a strobe light of violence. The battle for the 90th floor was a desperate, lopsided affair. Zero was fighting at 30% efficiency, his power levels in the critical red. He was a master of the blade, but the Excelsior mechs were designed to counter S-class threats. One mech caught Zero with a kinetic burst, sending him crashing through a row of server banks. Another fired a tether harpoon that locked onto his leg, pinning him to the floor. "You're a relic, Zero!" Vane shouted over the alarm sirens. "Your era of heroes and villains is over. New Eridu belongs to those who can manage the variables." Zero spat a glob of golden fluid onto the floor. He looked up at X, who remained motionless in the cylinder, a flicker of green light occasionally dancing behind his shut eyelids. Zero felt a surge of cold, absolute clarity. He had been built to be a weapon of mass destruction. He had spent his life trying to be a man, a friend, a hunter. But in this moment, looking at his brother being treated like a battery, Zero realized that new Eridu didn't need a man. It needed the monster he was born to be. "Fairy," Zero whispered, his voice bypassing the room's sensors and going directly into the proxy network. "Wise, Bell. I'm going to bypass my final inhibitor, the Absolute Zero protocol. It'll generate a localized zero-point field. You need to pull the Hares and the Bellabog crew back from the plaza. Now." "Zero, don't!" Bell's voice was a frantic sob in his ear. "That protocol will freeze your personality data. You won't know who X is. You won't know who we are. If he dies, it doesn't matter who I am," Zero replied. He didn't scream. He simply became a void. A shockwave of absolute freezing cold erupted from Zero's core, turning the air in the lab into a flurry of jagged ice crystals. The temperature dropped 400 degrees in a millisecond. The Excelsior mech's metal became brittle, their hydraulic fluid freezing instantly. Zero stood up, his armor now a terrifying frosted blue-white, his aura a dark, sucking vacuum of light. He moved through the mechs like a ghost through fog. One touch of the Z-Saber, and the elite machines shattered into a million frozen shards. Vane fell backward, his face pale with a terror he couldn't comprehend. What are you?" Zero didn't answer. He stood before X's cylinder, his hand resting on the glass. The ice began to spread across the containment field, shorting out the siphons. But the crisis wasn't over. The massive energy discharge from Zero's protocol, combined with X's wounded core, had created a beacon. In the sky outside, the purple vortex that had been suppressed by the Golden Purge suddenly reignited with a vengeful, blackened light. A shadow fell over the tower, a shadow larger than the building itself. A Nineveh-class Ethereal, the harbinger of the void, had sensed the two pulsing cores. It descended from the clouds, its massive insectoid wings shattering the upper windows of the tower. It wasn't here to infect. It was here to consume. The building groaned under the weight of the entity's presence, the floors beginning to buckle and dissolve into ether sludge. "The tower is falling!" Wise's voice was a roar of panic. "Zero, you have to get out of there. The spatial collapse is centering on your coordinates." Zero looked at X, then at the gargantuan monster clawing at the walls of the spire. He was at the end. His systems were failing, his memory banks were flickering with static, and the absolute zero cold was beginning to numb his own mind. He had one shot left, one final act of the Maverick Hunter. He shattered the cylinder, catching X as the blue Reploid slumped forward. Zero's ice-covered hand gripped X's shoulder. "X, I don't know if you can hear me," Zero whispered, his voice cracking. "But you always said that machines could grow, that we could choose our fate. Well, I'm choosing yours." Zero didn't run for the exit. He turned toward the harbinger of the void, the Z-Saber igniting one last time, the blade a mile-long spear of white freezing fire. He braced his feet against the crumbling floor, holding the comatose X behind him with his good arm. "Come and get us, you hollow piece of junk," Zero roared at the god monster. As the harbinger lunged, swallowing the top 5 floors of the HIA tower in a maw of purple darkness, a final, blinding flash of emerald and gold erupted from the center of the collapse. To the people of 6th Street, it looked like a star had been born and died in the same second. The tower fell, a mountain of glass and steel crashing into the plaza, buried under a cloud of dust that tasted of snow and ozone. The silence that followed the fall of the HIA tower was more profound than any explosion. It was the silence of a city holding its breath, a collective pause, as the dust of 1,000 shattered windows settled over the plaza like gray snow. The harbinger of the void was gone, its monstrous form shattered into harmless, inert ether crystals by the absolute zero flash. Where the apex of new Eridu's power had once pierced the clouds, there was now only a jagged, smoking stump of steel and concrete. In the center of the debris, the temperature remained impossibly low, a localized frost that defied the humid morning air. Nicole Damara was the first to reach the epicenter, her boots crunching over frozen marble. Behind her, Billy Kid and Anby moved with weapons drawn, but their focus wasn't on enemies. They were looking for the light. "There!" Billy shouted, his mechanical finger pointing toward a slab of reinforced plating that was glowing with a faint, dying amber. They dug with a desperation that bypassed professional greed. Ben Bigger used his massive strength to heave away tons of rubble, while Koleta Bellabog directed the sensors to locate the twin cores. When they finally cleared the last of the debris, they found them. Zero was slumped against a support pillar, his armor no longer blue-white with frost, but a dull, scorched crimson. He was shielding X with his own body, his hand still locked onto the blue Reploid's shoulder. Both were silent, their optical sensors dark, the only sign of life being the faint, rhythmic hum of their emergency cooling systems. "They're still here," Coleta whispered, her voice cracking as she checked the pulse sync on her handheld. "They're in deep system hibernation, but the cores are stable. They actually did it. They killed a god." The weeks that followed the fall of the Spire saw new Eridu change in ways no proxy could have predicted. The HIA underwent a violent internal purge, as Director Vane's illegal research was brought to light by Wise and Bell, who leaked the tower's internal logs to every public terminal in the city. The people of New Eridu no longer looked at the Hollows as an inevitable hungry end. They looked at them as a battlefield that could be won. In a quiet, high-security workshop beneath Random Play, outfitted with the best tools Bellabog Heavy Industries could provide, X finally opened his eyes. The room was warm, smelling of coffee and high-grade lubricant. He saw Bell sitting in a chair nearby, nodding off over a tablet filled with complex code. X sat up, his joints emitting a soft, smooth whir. He looked at his hands. They were the same, yet different. The data loss had left holes in his memory, vague flickers of a laboratory, a man with a white beard, and a long war. But the ghost of the city was now part of him. He could feel the pulse of the new Eridu grid, the lingering warmth of the Golden Purge. He had lost his past, but he had gained a world. "You're awake." A familiar gravelly voice spoke from the corner. Zero was leaning against the wall, his armor fully repaired, though he had refused to let the engineers buff out the deep scar on his chest plate. He looked at X with a gaze that was no longer cold. It was the look of a man who had found his brother again in the dark. "Zero," X said, his voice steady. "How long?" 3 weeks, Zero replied, pushing off the wall. "The city is still standing. The Maverick signal is gone, but the ether, it's still out there, X. And it's changing. The Sigma Echo was a fragment, but it proved that this world's corruption can be shaped. There are other shadows moving in the hollows, things that saw what we did, things that are curious." Wise entered the room then, carrying a tray of supplies. He stopped, a look of profound relief crossing his face. "Welcome back, X. You've got a lot of visitors waiting upstairs. The cunning hares are trying to charge people for a meet and greet, and Coleta has already offered you a permanent position as head of security." X looked toward the ceiling, his sensors picking up the muffled sounds of 6th Street. The laughter, the clatter of construction mechs, the life of a city that refused to die. He thought about the cycle of vengeance he had fought his whole life to break. In this world, the cycle was different, but the heart of the struggle was the same. "We aren't security guards, Wise," X said, standing up, his blue armor catching the light. "And we aren't just survivors. We are Maverick Hunters." Zero stepped beside him, his Z-Saber hilt glinting at his side. "The HIA is still watching us, X. Section 6 is still wary. And the Hollows, they're growing again. This wasn't the end of the war. It was just the first mission." X nodded, a sense of purpose reigniting in his core. He looked at Zero, then at the proxies who had risked everything to guide them. They were in a new world, a strange world of neon and shadows, but the duty remained the same. To protect those who could not protect themselves, to hunt the monsters that wore the faces of machines. "Then let's get to work," X said, as they walked toward the stairs, leaving the sanctuary of the workshop for the vibrant, chaotic reality of New Eridu. The sky outside was a clear, brilliant blue. The threat of the Sigma Echo was a memory, but the legend of the blue and red hunters was just beginning. In the heart of the Hollows, new Mavericks were rising, and the city would need its guardians more than ever. The cycle of the hunter had begun anew in the last city on Earth. Conclusion. The collision between the Maverick Hunters and the world of Zenless Zone Zero has rewritten the fate of New Eridu. X and Zero arrived as anomalies, ghosts of a forgotten future, but they leave the HIA tower as the city's true protectors. By purging the Sigma Ether virus, X proved that even in a world defined by corruption, a machine's potential for growth and empathy can act as a beacon of hope. Zero, through his absolute sacrifice, demonstrated that the line between a weapon and a hero is defined by the choice of who to protect. While the immediate threat of a mass Maverick event has been averted, the balance of power in New Eridu has been irrevocably shattered. The HIA is in turmoil. Section 6 has witnessed a power they cannot quantify, and the corporate entities of the city now covet the secret of the Reploid core. The Hollows remain a looming mystery, their depths hiding new Ethereals that have begun to adapt to the Hunters' combat styles. X and Zero are no longer just looking for a way home. They have found a new cause. As long as the Ether threatens to turn the innocent into monsters, the Maverick Hunters will be there to hold the line.